Hello, and welcome to this Dark Archives presentation. My name is Krista Murchison. I'm an assistant professor at Leiden University, and I'm going to be presenting on recovering medieval manuscripts destroyed during World War II. So many have said that archives hold a powerful influence over the ways in which knowledge gets produced. In Foucault's well-known construction, the archive on both discursive and more material levels actually constrains and shapes the knowledge that it purports to contain. For Jacques Le Goff and others, the archive has incredible influence. It gives shape to a nation's narratives, and in so doing, it serves as the center of the state's political power. The question then is, what happens when an archive gets destroyed or transformed? Does it continue to shape the ways in which knowledge gets produced, and if so, in what ways? These questions lie at the heart of this investigation, which is centered around the creation and analysis of a database of medieval manuscripts that were destroyed during the Second World War. The idea is to effectively allow the user to experience and commune with an archive that has no remaining material form. The goal of this presentation is to introduce the project, which is still in its initial phases, and to share with you some of the project's initial findings and analysis. So the project is centered on medieval manuscripts because they are particularly irrecoverable. Since manuscripts are handmade, they are each unique. While printed books often survive in multiple copies, manuscripts are by their very nature singular, and each therefore stands as a distinct cultural heritage object and testament to history. For the sake of the scope of this project, it is limited to manuscripts that were produced between the year 500 and 1500. These dates are, of course, somewhat arbitrary, but necessary for giving shape to the scope of the project. Also, for the sake of the scope of the project is limited to the manuscript collections that were destroyed from 4 nations, and these are the Netherlands, Belgium, France, and the UK. These nations have been selected because the scope of their losses makes them documentable within the time frame allotted for this project. There are many other nations that lost manuscripts during the Second World War, and I, of course, do not want to suggest that these were the only nations that lost manuscripts or the most important nations that lost manuscripts. But unfortunately, some of these nations lost so many manuscripts that it would just be impossible to document them for a project of this nature. Just as an example, it has been estimated that Italy lost some 39,000 manuscripts during the Second World War, and the scope of this loss makes it impossible to document within the scope of this project. So at this initial stage of the project, at least, the project is focused on 4 nations that have what has been estimated to be documentable losses. Also, in the interest of maintaining a realistic scope for the project is focused in this initial phase on public collections rather than private collections. Eventually, manuscripts from private collections might get included in the database that will result from this project. But at this stage, manuscripts from private collections are being omitted because private collections were often not documented to the same degree that public collections were documented, and their losses are much more difficult to estimate for that reason. So the manuscripts that got destroyed from these 4 key nations, in this initial phase, I have been trying to get a sense of the scope that has been lost. And my initial preliminary estimates suggest that we are looking at between 1,300 and 1,500 manuscripts that got destroyed from these nations during the Second World War. And of course, that the distribution of destroyed manuscripts is not equal. France, lost many, far, far more manuscripts than somewhere like the UK, for example. So the first stage of the investigation is gathering together in a systematic manner traces of the manuscripts that were destroyed under investigation. So traditional manuscript catalogs are going to provide the preliminary basis for this investigation. And these are particularly ones that were produced before the war and before the manuscripts were destroyed. Unfortunately, these catalog records, when they exist, tend to be relatively limited, and so this information is going to be supplemented with research from other sources. And these include medieval book lists, which often, where they exist, contain very cursory descriptions of manuscripts and some of the texts that they contain. This information is going to be supplemented with further research into the texts that were in the manuscripts. And for some of these manuscripts, the texts that they contain were actually edited before the manuscript got destroyed. And what that means is that there is a print version of the text that was in the manuscript that exists still. Now, where the text that was in the manuscript served as a base text for the edition will stand as a relatively close approximation to what the original text looked like. Where the text did not serve as a base text, the manuscript text can effectively be reconstructed using the base text that was used in the edition and variant readings that were printed in the edition. So effectively, I will be working back through the edition of the text to try to get at what the original manuscript text looked like and to try to recreate some portions of that original text for the sake of this online multimedia database that I will be creating. So the goal will be to allow the reader to experience some of that manuscript again, even though it no longer exists, by re-editing these textual fragments. Unfortunately, many of these texts were not produced in editions, so I will not be able to do this for every manuscript in the database, but at least for some of them. And this information is going to be supplemented with photographs or microfilm images of the manuscripts that were taken before the war. Now, these are very rare, but where they exist, these visual fragments will be collected and rearranged into their original manuscript order. And in so doing, I will be creating a multimedia experience of these lost manuscripts. And this will enable us to identify the texts that were contained in the manuscript, to analyze the script or handwriting that was in the manuscript, and provide more accurate information about the dating of the manuscript, while also allowing the user of the database to experience the manuscript on a multi-dimensional level. Now, this process can be illustrated using a manuscript that unfortunately got destroyed during the Second World War. This is Bibliothèque municipale manuscrit 1228. And this manuscript is fascinating because it contains, among other works, a French translation of an Arabic medical text, which is known as the Albucasis. At the start of the Second World War, this manuscript was in the municipal library in Metz, but it was unfortunately part of a collection that got moved from the municipal library in Metz, ostensibly to protect it. So after Metz was occupied by German forces in 1940, the municipal library's manuscript and incunabula collection was ultimately placed in a fort on Mont Saint-Quentin. And this move unfortunately proved devastating. As Allied troops started to advance towards Metz on September 1st, 1944, the German troops were ordered to destroy all the munitions reserves in order to keep them out of Allied hands. And so they destroyed the munitions storage of the fort on Saint-Quentin. And this was where the manuscripts from the Metz Municipal Library were stored. And so effectively the manuscripts in the Metz Municipal Library were set ablaze. And the fire proved merciless. Approximately 1,475 manuscripts were stored in the fort, and of these 726, which is almost half of the manuscripts, were destroyed. And among them was the manuscript containing the Albucasis text from the Metz Municipal Library collection. Now, before this manuscript got destroyed, it was of interest to a researcher who was working on the history of medicine, and this researcher took photos of the manuscript, but unfortunately these photos were stored in Germany, and they also got destroyed during the Second World War. However, some information about the manuscript can be reconstructed based on pre-war information about the manuscript. So a researcher who was working on the medieval history of surgery, known by the name of Karl Südhoff, printed fragments of the Albucasis text for the sake of his study. And shorter fragments were also printed prior to the war for a wholly different reason, and this was to illustrate the history of the French language for the sake of the Dictionnaire de l'ancienne langue française. These textual and visual fragments offer only snapshots into the destroyed French Albucasis text, but thankfully there was a copy of the Albucasis text that was relatively similar, produced during the medieval period. And this one, which does survive, offers some insight into the content of the lost Metz copy. So this other copy is in Bibliothèque nationale de France, Fonds français, manuscrit 1318. And a comparison between the copy in the BNF manuscript and the Metz manuscript reveals that there were many similarities in terms of the content of these copies, and it provides an opportunity for recreating, however provisionally, the missing and unedited pieces of the lost Metz manuscript. Now, further information about this lost Metz manuscript can be gleaned from pre-war book lists and other sources. So the manuscript appears on a list of manuscripts that passed to the city of Metz from a private collection of the Baron de Sailly when the Baron died in 1892. And a note at the end of the list of the Baron's records indicates that the Baron acquired a large portion of his collections in 1849 from the collection of a printer and bookseller named Théodore Talbé. And we can find this manuscript, the Metz manuscript, on an 1823 book list of Talbé. Now, this printer and bookseller, Théodore Talbé, acquired a large portion of his collections from the Bibliothèque de Woluwe, which was a Cistercian house, and it seems possible that the Metz manuscript was in the collection of the Cistercian house and, possibly was actually created in this Cistercian house. So by working back through these book lists, we can get some information about the provenance of this manuscript. So this process allows us to effectively reconstruct the contents, dating, and in some cases the medieval circulation history of lost manuscripts. And these details, along with any pre-war photographs or microfilm images that survive, will enable the database to offer a multimedia experience of these lost manuscripts to the user, effectively allowing the user to walk among the ghosts of lost manuscripts. Now, the database is going to be online, and online databases are often a point of concern for some people because it has been suggested that online technology is doomed to obsolescence. Many early online projects are no longer browser readable, and as browsers change, some of those earlier 90s attempts to create online databases have not been able to continue to be browser readable. So this is a point of concern for some people, and effectively, in order to ensure that this database will continue to be browser readable, I will be marking up key sections of the database in what is known as the TEI markup language. And the TEI markup language was designed specifically for the preservation of online texts, and it is not browser specific. So the idea is that it will be machine readable and browser readable for decades into the future, and this language has quickly become the standard for online text editing and preservation for this reason. So through this process, the database is ideally going to continue to be usable to people for decades in the future. Now, the database of destroyed manuscripts, once it is complete, will serve as a case study for exploring how the archive and its representational power is transformed by digital technology and the immaterial archival possibilities that digital technology entails. In so doing, it builds on a body of scholarship that acknowledges the technological developments of the past 3 decades and the ways in which these have fundamentally changed the shape of the archive and how the archive functions for society. By creating an archive of ghost manuscripts, effectively allowing the user to commune with an archive with no remaining physical or material reality, this project will explore the discursive and conceptual potential of wholly immaterial archives. The potential can be illustrated using the same manuscript containing the Ablucasis text that we've been looking at. When the manuscript existed and was housed as a textual artifact in a regional library collection, it operated as a material testament to modern-day France's medieval history. The manuscript's French translation of an Arabic medical text signaled a broader history of medieval intercultural communication. Now that the manuscript has been lost, it no longer represents this history in any material way, and its role in the French archive has become part of its larger provenance. Once the manuscript is effectively pieced together in an online format, its representational power differs from that of its original form. It no longer stands as a material link to the past, and concomitantly, it will no longer be tied in a material form to one single collection or nation. Its representational power, then, is dissociated to some degree from national and geographical borders. Rather, the manuscript has become a cultural heritage artifact that is equally accessible by anyone with an internet connection. By thinking through the transformations that happen to an archive when it is recreated in the digital realm in this way, this project is aimed at helping us think through the representational power and potential of an immaterial archive while also breathing some life into these significant but unfortunately lost collections. Thank you.